Good morning, Namaste, Namaste India. This is for the morning show of Amra Foundation. I am Vijayalakshmi Nanda and I would be speaking about my story. But before I do that, I would like to reflect on Amra Foundation. Amra Foundation is a foundation committed to
Good
women and
morning,
girls.
Namaste. Namaste, India. This is for the morning show of Amra Foundation.
Uh, Amra Foundation has a helpline which is catering to the mental health counseling of women and girls. We would like you to take note of their helpline number, which we will be sharing with you shortly. However, before I do that, I would also like to give a shout out to Vinita Bakshi, who is the founder member of Amra Foundation and alumni of Miranda House, the college in which I teach, and I'm also presently the acting principal of the college. But as I take you through my story, and as I move towards talking about my story, I do not know whether it's important to share a story as only a personal story. So every story for me, coming from a feminist perspective, is basically a story about the political. So for me, the feminist slogan, the personal is the political, becomes extremely important. And I would like to use Carol Hanish's slogan, popularized by Kate Millett, the radical feminist, that the personal is the political. So when I move on to talking about the personal as the political, the most important point that many of us need to know and understand is why is it that a woman's story is important? Because a woman's story is based on a number of issues, and some of those issues have to do with struggles, with discrimination, with survival. But it is not to say that all women's stories are only about survival and discrimination. There are also stories of survival in many ways, but there are also stories of triumph, of celebration, of solidarity. So, in that note, I begin my story. I think I was born in Odisha, where I studied and I lived a large part of my life. I was about 21 when I moved to Delhi. And having lived in a protected environment, it is not as if I did not face discrimination. The larger discrimination that I was, facing was not necessarily from my family, but it was based on the kind of questions that we were asked, because we were three daughters in a family which did not have sons. And in India, that's a family that is always questioned. Don't you have any brothers? So that became my first window to understanding gender discrimination, because I did not see it in my immediate family, which celebrated us as equals, but definitely outside, from other members, from society, from friends, one was asked that question. Why is it that you don't have brothers? And that is when I realized that the intense son preference in India is embedded in the consciousness so much that people feel it is natural and normal to ask families as to why they do not have brothers, or why they don't have sons, or how it is a sad story. And that led me to getting the first lesson of feminism, so to say, from my family, from my own father, from my mother, who taught us that there is no discrimination, there is no inequality, and this inequality really stems from a societal understanding. So the first principle of feminism, the sex gender distinction as it is called, was explained to me from this experience. Moving beyond that, education in Odisha, which is not essentially as openly patriarchal as other parts of India are, I did not witness the inequalities in that form. But yes, there were other forms of inequalities, mostly located in two ways. One is the public forms of sexual harassment, or what it used to be called as eve teasing, although I personally do not purport to that term, that we faced in the streets and other places. And that became a way for us to realize that how the woman the woman's body or the girl's body is objectified, commodified, and how that becomes a part and parcel of the normalizing of growing up girl to live with adequate doses of fear, as it's called. And that ritual of subjugation continues. and how we are supposed to interact, kind of respond to that. What are the ways of crisis response, and how the laws were not there at that point of time of sexual harassment at workplace, and how that became an obstacle in the path of growing up as an equal, how it became subjugating. So that was one. The other part of it had to do with the way in which women are perceived, or girls are perceived, in terms of what they look like, or how they should look like. And that became another way of for me to be exposed to this understanding, which was about, you're too thin or you're too fat, the usual body myths that you respond to, and the forms of subtle forms of discrimination and violence that one is exposed to. So that becomes another form. And that made me understand that it is the kind, they are also forms or rituals of subjugation, where women are told how to live their lives, and the burden is carried on throughout your childhood to moving on to your adolescence years to your adulthood, and how that remains an obstacle somewhere in your social conditioning. And going past that, one moves on, and I moved to Delhi, and here in Delhi I was exposed to a different kind of culture. While you had the best of educational institutions, I understood that the forms of patriarchy in Delhi were far more entrenched. And then, through a certain learning of feminist texts, and through various movements that were around me, one learned about how one needs to negotiate with that, how one needs to bargain with patriarchy, how one needs to find ways of countering it. And my first exposure to that was through a very well-known, leader of the women's movement, Veena Mazumdar, who was working then at Center for Women's Development Studies. And it was with the Center for Women's Development Studies that I started a small campaign, a campaign against pre-birth elimination of females, which is basically a campaign which was looking at the declining child sex ratio in India, especially in the 0 to 6 age group. Again, going back to my childhood days, looking at intense son preference. So that is when I realized that, girls were not even allowed to be born because of the daughter aversion or the intense son preference that families in India had. And these were urban, families, and they were doing this through new reproductive technologies, through, by bringing about pre-birth elimination of females. And that is when the campaign began. And through Veena Mazumdar, I became aware of the women's movements, and the Towards Equality report became my, of 1971, became my Bible, so to speak, or my Gita, so to speak. So I read through that. I tried to understand that. I engaged with that to look at significant indicator of women's status, the sex ratio, the forms of violence against women, looking at employment, looking at political participation. So I was not introduced to feminist learning through education in a master's or in the undergraduate courses, as is common now, but through a certain practice and through learning through the movement. And then the other person who had a major influence in my life was Kamla Bhasin, the famous feminist, but also a friend, a philosopher, a guide, who led me on a particular understanding of how to do that with love. And the 1 Billion Rising campaign, which emphasizes on the power of love rather than the love for power, exposed me to a more compassionate or a more enabling kind of activism, where one could look at restorative justice rather than punitive justice, where it was not just about, women and men, but finding compassionate, enabling individuals across genders. So that was a learning. So I would look at these as moments in my life when I learned about how to be an equal. What are the ways to be an equal? And then the next stage was about engaging as a teacher, as a teacher teaching feminism in a class in Miranda House, where the students made me alert to intersectionality. So while there was one essential story about women's inequality, I looked at class, I looked at caste, I looked at other forms, ethnicity, disability, sexuality. They became ways of learning. I learned a lot from the students, from their conversations, from what they brought to the class, through their diverse kind of examinations of inequalities, and every home, every girl in the class had a different story to tell, and those stories made me understand the inequalities and the struggles that existed uh, in every home, and the kind of bargaining and negotiating with patriarchy that they did in their lives. And these were not stories that were present in the text that I studied. For example, even in all the texts that one studied, one did not see, even if you look at it historically, the kind of story that Mirabai had to offer. I was very, very influenced by the story of Mirabai as a child. But later on, I saw the kind of the kind of struggle, the kind of radical love that was present in her understanding of the consciousness that exists in this world. And I was very, very influenced by that writing. And in fact, presently I did write a piece on Mirabai, which became included in a book on Indian political thought, because I felt that we also need to look at indigenous roots of where our struggles lie. And in Mirabai, I found a story I could identify with, in the way in which she was able to, rise up against powers which were patriarchal in her times, and to be able to, mark out a story of radical love, of rebellion, of with a supreme consciousness of love. And I thought that she also gave us a certain learning that is present also within various Western or other forms of questioning of domination, where whatever that domination may be, patriarchal forces at play, or dominations that may exist elsewhere in other forms. So how she was able to question that. So she became a learning for me. So one I drew on these learnings, and in that sense, the first thing that happened to me within the class is that I questioned, through the feminist learning, through my own experiential understanding, I questioned hierarchies. So how do I question hierarchies? I question hierarchy by realizing that in a class, the teacher is highly privileged. So how do you break that hierarchy? So bringing about a non-hierarchical classroom was a very, very important part of my learning. How do you bring about a non-hierarchical classroom? You do that by being on an equal platform, by being able to be questioned. So that became our important learning. And in that small class of teaching feminism, I learned a lot. So there's a lot that one learns from students. I mean, those conversations are exasperating, but they're stimulating. And they stimulate us to understand the basic notions of equality by living it, by experiencing it. So I would say that my teaching feminism became a way of learning by being part of various movements, especially the ones like the 1 Billion Rising or other forms of small movements that were taking place within students groups. One learned a lot. One learned even by questioning, even by confronting, even by trying to understand, and trying to understand the ideological kind of confrontations. But for me, I moved with what Ambedkar would call an epistemic humility, that it is important that I don't see everything from an ideological prism, but by an experiential understanding which is rooted in my own reality. So I did look at my own reality, which was a middle class reality, an educated family, but also examining intersectionality in the way I was able to confront it around me. So what are the kind of intersectionalities? Another learning that I have is that there is no end to this kind of learning about hierarchies. So I did learn a lot about questioning hierarchies through that particular process. One was looking at disability, for example, not a mainstream part of epistemic knowledge. So how it is important to make disability a part of epistemic knowledge, how gender interacts with age, with disability, or for that matter, sexuality. I guess the LGBTQIA movement taught me a lot about how to examine our own perceptions, our own social, sociological understanding. So there was no one way. So one kept learning as one evolved through the process, and that learning is never going to end. So as a teacher, and as being part of the women's development cell, as being part of certain women's groups, I learned a lot, and I learned the importance of feminist solidarity or sisterly solidarity to various friends who were reading, writing, who supported me. So for me, I mean, I always felt that women are essentially the best support systems one can form, and sisterly solidarity is what I engaged with. I found that even within family, even outside. I also like to mention something about a young person who I supported and who was fighting for the rights of her daughters, Mitu Khurana. And it was through Mitu Khurana and her journey trying to, protect her own twin daughters, first from not being eliminated or not being terminated when they were conceived, by fighting with the PCPNDT Act, which is an act against sex selective abortion, and then, fighting a struggle against her marital family later on to get justice. And Mitu's journey, which was almost for 14, 15 years, which I followed, part of my research work, part of my activism, I learned a lot with her. And unfortunately, Mitu passed away this year. She was in her early 40s, and her death has been one of the most painful moments of my life, because she taught me a lot. And I would like to dedicate whatever little that I have done in this life to Mitu Khurana and her two daughters, who are a part of my life, so to say, part of my family, so to say. But just wanting to understand how a person's life, even if it is not that long, can be a learning for all of us just by her struggle. So Mitu was a doctor, she was a pediatrician, and she fought for the rights of her daughters. But her story is perhaps the most feminist one can ever have, because for her it was again experiential. It was a struggle against those societal forces which believe that giving birth to a son is the only way for a woman to mark her identity. So I would make a commitment to Mitu's life. And this last year actually she passed away. So 2020 has been a year of so many people losing lives, but it is a year of women fighting major struggles and facing a lot of discrimination. And the pandemic has been a leveler at one point, but it has also been a revealer of the various forms of discrimination that women face, whether it is in the workforce, whether it is within homes where violence takes place. So and also it has also shown us the grit and determination of women as workers, as doctors, as teachers. So women have been the COVID healers, and that's been one. So my journey as a teacher has been one which has dabbled between texts and life. And so you have the feminist texts which one lived by, and one was always influenced by the writings. Like I said, Mirabai influenced me, Savitribai Phule influenced me, but I was equally influenced by writings of Simone Beauvoir, or by Kamla Bhasin, or Anita Ghai, who writes about disability. Even things that friends do or write, I'm influenced by that, because these are the struggles that one is associated with. I'm also influenced and inspired by young students who move forward and are able to teach us lessons, because their lives are far more difficult today than ours were. I mean, the complexities that they have to navigate, the young people have to navigate, and the amount of stress that they face, that is also a learning that one gets as to how they are able to cope, or how they are able to lead their lives in present times. Another major learning that has happened in the past few years has been on mental health. The way in which it was, the way in which it was, understood, and now the way in which people are opening up to understanding it. The need for mental health support is a major one, and I recognize that as a teacher, as a parent, as a friend, and as heading an institution at this point, or which is Miranda House. So my learning and my writing has been around gender issues. I have looked at reflection pieces around my life. I have also looked at engaging with human rights, gender, environment, and I have done that and I've never found working alone, an experience that I enjoy. So all my writings have been with friends. So my first friend who I wrote with was Sashi Motilal, again an exemplary woman whom I learned a lot from, academician, friend, philosopher guide. She taught philosophy, and She also leads an exemplary life of integrity and learning. So I learned a lot from her, and the book that we wrote together, Human Rights, Gender and Environment, and Understanding Social Inequality, are reflective pieces around that. Then I wrote again with a student whom I taught, but now who's a colleague, and I wrote with her on discourse on rights in India, again an edited volume where we engaged with various forms of rights. We looked at issues of discrimination against the girl child. We looked at political participation of women. We looked at other forms of discrimination going beyond gender, but looking at how power structures exist in society and how you need to question it. So we looked at it through the prism of our learning, which is political science, but we also looked at experts and how they reflected on environment and other such concerns, human rights, gender. So those were learnings that one came to. Then the next way of learning, so writing together was another project. I do dabble a lot with poetry. I find it exploratory in that sense, and I find it liberating in another sense, writing poetry, writing stories, but they are a very, very personal experience. I do not purport to be a poet or a writer in that sense, but I do like to engage with it because it provides me a certain freedom of expression, so to say, and it provides me a certain examination of life through words. So I have found that. And I have seen and met many inspiring women in my life. They have been friends. I have had very good friendships with people who have led me on a certain path, and I have found it very, very supportive. So of course, my mother definitely. I have 9 paternal aunts. So one of my paternal aunts has been a huge support. Friends within my colleagues, friends outside. I've always found it good to be involved with diverse groups of people and not just looking at a homogeneous group, but across class, across communities, because there's a lot to be learned from each other. And I have found that extremely fruitful, productive, and supportive to the way in which one learns or gets educated. Then I think, as an acting principal of the college, I would like to bring in an anecdotal understanding of how life unfolds through that. So I did come to a particular position due to the fact that I was vice principal, and then I moved on to be acting principal. And the first question I was asked by a lot of friends is that, you'll have to be a little more authoritative. You'll have to learn how to say no. You can't be so soft, so to say. So, and I reflected on that, and I did try a lot to fit into the mold or reinforce the stereotype about how power structures are to be worked. But I realized that that is not authentic. And it is best to remain authentic to one's own self. So I remained authentic to myself, and I continued to be who I was. And in the process, I mean, it took about 6-7 months for people to understand a functioning which was completely democratic, which was about collective wisdom, which was about calling back decisions and then going back to the drawing board again, or accepting one's own flaws, and not falling in love with one's own ideas or being opinionated, but looking at collective wisdom for everything, and democratized and non-hierarchical system where people across the board had voices. It was difficult in the beginning because that's not how leadership is essentially seen. But looking at empathetic leadership is difficult. And I won't say that I am essentially empathetic, but I like to be, I would want to be. So empathy or empathetic leadership is something that I would like to reflect. And empathetic leadership is about following rather than leading. So and collecting as many voices, and stepping back and looking at ways in which others perceive it, how it impacts others. So that has been my learning, and one is still striving. But having said that, I mean, it has been fruitful. I have learned from my colleagues who have surrounded me. And at the end of the day, I would say I am also, I have a not a very typical family as Indians have. So I'm going to end with that. So basically, I stay with, my father stays with us, and we have a home, we have an equal home where we share. My mother passed away when I was 21. So my father, we are three sisters. So my father stays in my house, and you could say it is our house. My father and I own the house together. So I think women's right to property in the way it's seen needs to be re-engaged with. So it is our house. My father and I share an equal house. It is financially owned by both of us. We are collectively responsible for it, and my spouse stays with me. My daughter is in the US. She's 24 years old, and she leads her own life. She's studying there, and I have, in one sense, her choices have been also a part of our collective decision making. So, as Anthony Giddens says, we have tried to create a family which is a democracy of emotions. So that's also another form of equality that one needs to engage with, and it is the most difficult, the family being a space for equality. So this is the way in which ownership has to be seen. And while I say that this is our house, meaning that I and my father own this in common, I would also say that a home does not belong to me. So I keep an open home. We keep an open home where friends and family, and it is open to women and girls. So we have had students staying over for long periods. We have friends staying over for long periods. And it is people we have known. They could also be strangers. So we have tried to maintain that. And the COVID has led to a spanner on that, but mostly it is an open home. And so in many ways, through experiential, through my own practices, I have tried to be who I claim to be. And it is a difficult journey to be who you claim to be. And I would like to be as authentic about it. Here, I would like to give talk about friendships, many friendships. I would like to celebrate the friendship of Miss Rakhi Bakshi, who has been a part of my life for a long time, and she continues to be part of various initiatives. She was part of She Speaks also, and she's now a part of Her World. And of course, Vinita Bakshi, who is the founder member of Amra Foundation and is a leader in her own right, a writer whom I have come to know through Rakhi Bakshi, but who's also an alumni of Miranda House, now supporting us through a digital inclusion program. These are the ways in which women connect, and I think engaging with compassion, with empathy, and trying to know that we are all not perfect beings, but we are all capable of a lot of kindness. The COVID has shown us the importance of kindness, compassion, healing, of having a sustainable lifestyle committed not to greed, but to a certain frugal understanding of how we should live and how we should share. I think these are important learnings, and it need not necessarily come with any tagline. I personally find feminism a way of supporting my own understandings, but you can find that anywhere, and wherever you find it, wherever that voice of equality consciousness is found, that's a voice that I feel very happy to engage with. I have found that, and I have learned that from many around me, and my learning is still not complete. I would still say I am a project in the making. This is a personal sharing, so I'm not really bringing in an institution here. But yes, the institution also becomes important. Miranda House, the legacy of its leadership, the legacy of the young people who have been a part of it, radical voices within it, compassionate, healing voices within it, have taught me a lot. So for me, although I did not go to college in Miranda House, I learned a lot from that. I keep learning from friends, from family members, from books, and certain books that have influenced me a lot. Like I said, of course, Mirabai's story, again, I'm bringing that up. But beyond that, I have, looking at Virginia Woolf, Room of Her Own, or looking at Sylvia Plath's writings, or looking at engagements with Kamala Bashir, even her booklets on patriarchy, her own life, that has been a learning. And beyond that, there are many such texts, many such learnings, which do not purportedly call themselves feminist, but which teach us about equality. My whole life has been a striving towards equality, trying to understand equality and trying to practice it in my day-to-day lives. It is still not complete, and there's a lot that I can learn. I would like to thank Amra Foundation for this opportunity for me to speak my story. My story is not just my story, but it is the story of many women, including including women I do not know, the stories that I learn from, and the shoulders of other great women that I stand on. I dedicate it to them, and to Vinita Bakshi, who has asked me to speak here. A shout out to you, Vinita. Thank you very much for this opportunity, to Amra Foundation, and to the through the helpline, which is a free toll-free helpline. Please reach out to them. Thank you very much.